So this is Healing Clients, helping providers from the point of view of a psychotherapist, which is what I do most. And let's start with a picture of a mural from San Francisco called The Immigrants. I thought it was a pretty moving painting. No matter how we come to the United States in the best or worst condition, if we choose to leave our countries or not, and whether we can go back or not, all immigrants leave something behind. So the definition of trauma, it's an event, big or small, perceived either consciously or unconsciously as a shock for the system, and that cannot be integrated or made sense of. Trauma affects the psyche, the brain, and the body. Trauma alters our beliefs, our emotions, our health, and our behavior. And our internal system tries to compensate for it until it is retrieved, processed, and healed. Trauma remains frozen in time. Therapy can help understand and heal trauma and restore harmony and integrity to the system. What is to be trauma informed? It is when we ask not what is wrong with this person, rather we ask what happened to this person. So many times all we see is the tip of the iceberg, and we need to be curious about what actually is in the context of that person. So I divided the types of trauma for immigrants after their arrival in the US and before arrival. So after arrival, it starts, crossing the border. And all of these are things that I have heard about, and there might be more. Border crossing in itself is, of course, dangerous. Arrest and incarceration, family separation, travel within the US, ISOP surveillance, ankle device, legal uncertainty in time and outcome. Think only of DACA. Poverty, separation from children or partner who stayed behind, separation from relatives who pass away in the country of origin, racism, intimate partner violence, language barrier, cultural dissonance, parentification and or adultification of children. Think how many times immigrants' children are in the position of being the interpreter and hearing way too many things that they should not be exposed to. Being a US citizen, if you're a child of immigrants, but without all the rights, lack of services, fear of deportation, being stopped on the road, exploitation, deportation in itself for the person themselves and for those who are behind. And then, of course, the COVID-19 related illness, being uninsured, unemployed, or being evicted, possibly. What about previous traumas? Trauma doesn't start when people enter the United States. And as persons, we are like building block, and any trauma that we experience early in our lives is likely to affect every stage of our developments. sometimes our entire lives. So the second half is challenges and possible traumas that immigrants can experience before arrival. And here I'm going backwards. So before arriving to the United States, they have crossed other countries. Maybe they've been in refugee camps. They had to actually leave their country, which in itself is a big decision. Maybe they suffer gangs violence, police corruption, gender violence, gender discrimination, also intimate partner violence, poverty, war, persecution, separation from parents who have already left. Some people, first the father comes or the mother, and the children stay behind until an indefinite amount of time. Abuse and neglect, abandonment by parents or being orphan, which is, abandonment is, probably one of the biggest traumas there is, and what I call unidentified traumas. Trauma is quite personal, and it doesn't have to be a huge event, a plane accident, or it can be anything that we experience really in life. And as children, or even adolescent, or even later in life, we might not identify them as traumas. And it's only through the work of therapy that sometimes people realize the impact of those events. This is the therapy model that I use. The founder is Dick Schwartz, and the website is the IFS Institute. The internal family system model is very useful to conceptualize how our mind works, and to, as we say, have a map of understanding all those thoughts and emotions and behaviors that are part of us. It's a therapy technique that is cutting edge and very efficient, and is becoming very, very popular in the area of trauma work. It's also a daily meditation practice. This is not only for our clients, we can use it as therapists and providers to get to know our parts and work with all of our different parts, and make it a daily meditation. And it's finally, it's universal because it can be used not only to conceptualize persons as individuals, but also, the couple, the family, the community, the countries. And once we start to conceptualize and think in terms of parts, so it's impossible to think otherwise. It's a model that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. Here's the logo. So what is the model? It says we have many parts, thoughts, emotion, behaviors, and they are not good or bad. Life makes them more or less extreme, and they all have good intentions. So what we call the exiles are the most sensitive, vulnerable, and playful and innocent parts. So this is how we were born, with all those qualities of innocence and curiosity and joy. And when young parts experience trauma, they become isolated from the rest of the system. And what trauma does is separates us from those qualities of joy and happiness and curiosity and enthusiasm. And trauma not only cuts off qualities, but it replaces them with burdens. So to be trauma informed is look for trauma before the protective masks of anxiety, anger, depression, addiction. So in order for us to forget or to avoid thinking about events that have been traumatic in our lives, we have a lot of different strategies. We can maybe be busy all the time, or we can decide, well, from this day on, I'm not gonna express my emotions because it's too dangerous. These kind of, or, I'm going to use something to make the pain go away. And it can be starting addictions. So therapy is, if you look on the left, clients come, when they come to therapy, they have all those, they talk about all those parts and emotions and behaviors, and they don't necessarily know how to make sense of it or organize them. So therapy is, first of all, detect the parts and be able to differentiate them, and also follow their trails to see where they originated and how they relate to other parts. And another aspect of therapy, and IFS therapy in particular, is look at how those parts originated, and go to possibly the very first time those parts appeared. For instance, let's say a child who did not feel safe because they were abused. And so at a very, very young age, maybe they decide, well, from now on, I'm going to be the perfectly obedient person. I'm not going to rock the boat, make any waves. I'm going to just stay within myself. And maybe later in life, they have another part that wants to be more assertive. And they don't know why can't I be assertive. So then we go back and see, okay, where does it come from and when did it start? In the big elements in the internal family system therapy, how we conceptualize the mind, is the self. Is something that everybody has and is present at birth. And it is like an inner wisdom that knows how to heal our own system. It cannot be damaged. And this is very important because a lot of trauma victims think they have been damaged very deep inside. And for us therapists, it is very important to know that it cannot, their inner spiritual essence is there. And it is very important for them to realize that. It's like, and the self can be compared to the music in our orchestra, if we were an orchestra. So the self has 8 innate qualities: calm, clear, curious, creative, confident, connected, courageous, and compassionate. And we call them the 8 C's. And the internal system can be compared to an orchestra. So when the conductor knows how to lead all the parts, and all the parts and the instruments are well tuned and play in rhythm, is when the music is very nice. But when one of the instruments is broken or out of tune or out of rhythm, then the music is not so smooth anymore. So burnout prevention, I'll talk about self-assessment, compassion versus empathy, self-compassion and self-care. So self-compassion would be, ask not what's wrong with me, ask what part of me is activated. And as I assess myself, or as we assess ourselves, I would ask, am I calm, confident, courageous? Do I have clarity? Am I connected to other people? Am I connected to my own parts, aware of my own emotions? Am I curious? Can I be totally interested in the other person and the world? Am I creative enough that I can find solution to any issues? And am I compassionate to others? And I think as service providers, this is an easy point. We are all probably very compassionate for others, but are we compassionate for ourselves? So am I all that, or am I stressed out, tired, discouraged, feeling powerless, dreading daily tasks, irritable, feeling anxious, bored, depressed, using too much empathy, and I will explain what it is, using not so healthy coping behaviors? Am I COVID-19 issues saturated and screen, Zoom, computer, webinars fatigued? So here's the balance between compassion and empathy. Some people use the terms a little bit differently, but this is pretty much what we use in IFS. And we need both. Both are needed, but we have to have a balance between the two. So the first point would be empathy would coming from a part, whereas compassion comes from self. And as you saw, we thrive to have the self being in the leading position. Empathy would be what we call blended with a part, whereas compassion, we have a little bit of separation. We can look at it a little bit from a distance. Empathy has that sense of I must, so some pressure, where compassion would say I can. Empathy says your pain is my pain, whereas compassion says your pain is not my pain. Empathy wants action, whereas compassion wants connection. For those familiar with the polyvagal theory, empathy is somewhat hyper aroused. There is tension in our cells, whereas compassion is what they call vagal ventral, which is a very more relaxed position. And the two are apparently totally different neurological pathways. With empathy, there is some risk of suffering vicarious trauma. Whereas with compassion, we do what we call holding space for someone's trauma. Maybe you've heard clients say, "Oh, you are the first. This is the first time I tell anybody," and when they share some events that have been very impactful, and and this can happen when we do that, holding space, meaning that the person feels safe to share, and they feel that we're able to handle it. Finally, empathy would be react, and compassion would be respond, which is a little different nuances. So self-care, from 1 to 10, how much priority do you give to time alone? And here it's a little ironic because with the COVID, of course, some of us are too alone and some of us are not alone anymore enough. But you see what I mean. Some time to reflect and to have some quiet. Good nutrition, good sleep, having a good listener or therapist, very important. Regular exercise, support group, intimate relationship, time management, being productive, assertive communication, a hobby that nourishes your soul, and finally, meditation. So, conclusion, how does IFS reduce burnout? First of all, the trust that we as providers and therapists have in the client's self. So we know that they have that capability of healing themselves and taking care of themselves at some point. So that takes a pressure off of the therapist or the provider. We trust in our own self, so we can we have that tool to be able to recenter in ourselves. So it's important to be aware of our parts and our early signs of burnout. the view of self as undamaged is very hopeful, and I mean it helps me a lot. It's an evidence-based, very efficient therapy model. Then we can learn to have a balance between compassion and empathy, and observe ourselves, and check, okay, where am I, in that balance. Sorry, and yeah, balance between compassion for others and self-compassion. Questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation. As a therapist myself, it's always very important to have self-care and burnout in the forefront of our minds to continue to provide services for this population that often has a high level of trauma. So we have questions here.
And Reina, after the questions,
yes.
I have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
That I'd like to play a little video, which is an exercise of self-care.
Great. So I'll leave 5 minutes for that.
Yes,
wonderful.
Thank you.
That sounds lovely. So we have a question here. I like your balance between compassion and empathy slide, but which is best? Is one better in one situation versus the other?
Well, what I say is that we need both. And when you practice, of course, sometimes you're gonna feel the person's emotions, but it's maybe going back and forth and being able to take a step back and not being totally blended with it. And being blended or unblend from our parts is what we do very commonly in IFS. I hope that answers our questions. And we cannot be totally cold and, when we work with people, of course, but we cannot either be totally blended with them, because it's not going to help them in the long term. And it's not going to help us. And if we want to be able to do this in the long term, day in, day out, we have to take care of, ourselves as well. Yeah.
How do you deal with clients? I think it's dissociation.
Okay. Well, we treat dissociation as a part. Some other models would work at grounding the person. And actually, in the IFS model, what that would mean is that, let's ground and let's ignore dissociation. And actually, dissociation has a lot of information to give us. So we talk to dissociation. That's how we do. We say, okay, well, to the client, you would say, or talk directly to the part. So you're a part of the client that wants to separate. Can you tell me more? And yeah, it's actually possible. Yeah.
Here says, I really appreciate the summary of the IFS model. Can you speak to your experience using it with different immigrant groups or other demographics that may influence how you apply this model?
So I use it with for all of my clients, not only the immigrants. And at first, I thought that the language was very important. I mean, and I use it in English and in Spanish. But it's pretty irrelevant of intellectual parts of the client. I don't know if I'm making sense. Some clients, regardless of their level of education or culture or language, they're like natural. They go in it immediately. So I use it pretty much the same. Yeah, and frankly, clients love it because it makes a lot of sense and it puts order. In therapy, some clients and in domestic violence, it's they're very polarized because they're very divided and pull in all direction. And when we explain the model of the IFS, that all parts are there for a reason and trying to help, and it's a big relief. They say, "Oh, so I'm not crazy," and I say, "No, of course you're not crazy at all. It's everything as a meaning and a function."
So we have the 5 minutes left. There's one more question. So if you want to answer that in the chat and start your self-care activity, answer that in the question and answer.
Okay, so I hope it starts, and if the sound is not there, let me know, because the sound is a big part. So it's a little animation movie about breathing through your anxiety, breathing through your pain. It's in French and Spanish, but I thought it was so. I invite you to do whatever you want, stand up and dance and sing and breathe if you like. So I have to share again, I guess. Oh, hold on. I have to make sure that I optimize the two.